The Parra Cave podcast, proudly brought to you by major sponsor Jack's Pale Ale, exclusively available at Parramatta Eels Club, Shannon Cooney from Glenmore Park Realty, BTZD Clothing, and the official media partner of the Parra Cave podcast, the Parramatta Times.
Welcome to another episode of the Parra Cave podcast. And now over to your host, Troy Warner, broadcasting live from the world-famous Parra Cave.
And yes, hello and welcome back to another episode of the Parra Cave podcast. Troy Warner here, and today I just wanted to jump on and talk about my role on the Talking Parra podcast. Now, it was brought to my attention the other night from a person that I have known for a long time, a fellow Parramatta fan, and they won't be named due to personal and privacy reasons, so I won't mention their name, but I have known them for a long time, and they got in contact with me the other night and were just commenting about my role on the Talking Parra podcast. Now, I just wanted to make clear to people that may or may not know what my role on that podcast is, and simply because there has been some suggestions that I am trashing the club and I am involved in the posts that come out from that podcast on social media and the like. Well, I can now tell you, well, I could tell you before anyway, that my role on that podcast is I am a member of the podcast with 5 other Parramatta Eels fans, and that is all we are. We're fans, not experts. And my role on that podcast is I am the audio producer, so I produce the audio content that comes out on the podcast channels, Apple and Spotify, each and every week from the chats that we have on a Tuesday night. And my other role on the podcast is simply to give my opinion as a Parramatta Eels fan. That is all my role entitles, is my position as a fan of the club that I love, the Parramatta Eels. As you know, I am a massive Parramatta Eels fan and member of the club, and I do have my opinion about the club, and that is all my opinions come on to that podcast each and every week. Now, some people I have been led to believe are not happy with that, and the club isn't happy with that, potentially because I am probably maybe the most well-known member of that podcast, I guess you could say, being a Parramatta Eels fan. And look, some of the things that they have mentioned to me, talking about like every post that comes out from that podcast. Look, I don't do any posting from that podcast. As I mentioned before, I'm just the audio producer and a fan who has an opinion about the club. Now, I don't necessarily always agree with the others' opinions on there, but that is what we're on that podcast for, to have our opinions as fans. And that is like everybody else. We aren't going to agree with everybody else's suggestions or comments about the club, because that's what we are about. Fans have different opinions. Now, one of the things was that Clint Gutherson isn't up to it. Well, look, I did give my opinion about that on the podcast when we were talking about it. I cannot exactly remember when it was. It might have been a few weeks ago. And look, all I said was that, yes, the Gutho is probably struggling a little bit with his knee injuries that he has had from over the years and just recently. And yes, he has lost a bit of speed, and yes, he isn't as fast as any of the other fullbacks in the game at the moment, like your most notables, like Reece Walsh, who else is there, like Kula, like Tommy Turbo, who else is there, Dylan Edwards even. So and the question was raised, I think it was a couple of weeks ago, about if he should retire or not. Now, my opinion on that was that it was up to Clint. It was simply up to Clint, and that he shouldn't be forced into retirement, shouldn't be forced into medically retired. I said that it should be up to him. If he thinks that he is not up to it, which I don't think he is, because what a game he had against the Warriors on Friday night. He was the man of the match. 185 metres, I think it was, a try, 5 out of 5 conversions, one or two try assists. So he was in and everything, and also saved a try as well by stripping the ball out. So look, he has lost some pace. He isn't your conventional fullback. In that, I mean, he doesn't. I don't think I've seen him, break the line as such. Like, he doesn't make 50, 60 metre runs off kick returns or anything like that I can remember that I've seen recently. But hey, Clint is a different sort of a fullback. So, as I said before, had a wow of a game on Friday night against the Warriors. He is definitely 100% committed to the club. He is probably the player that you want in your team, because he does everything that he can to strive to get a victory for his team. So, look, in terms of the suggestion that Gutho isn't up to it, that was my opinion on that podcast. Look, others may have had a different podcast, different suggestion or reasoning on the podcast, but that was mine. Every protest post that comes out from the Talking Parra podcast, look, that is something that is out of my control. As I said, I do not do the posting for the Talking Parra podcast. That is something that they have run, and look, I am a part of that podcast. Doesn't necessarily mean that I agree with it, but that is something that they have run with. So every single post that you will see from them is from them. Now, look, they are wanting change on and off the field because of our results, I guess, over the last couple of years. And look, in a way, I do agree that in some areas the club does need some changes, because quite simply we can't be performing like this as a Western Sydney club. In my opinion, we should be the biggest club in the West, and we should be, if not the West, then we should be perhaps the biggest club in the NRL. We have a massive fan base, we have a massive member base, passionate fans, loyal fans, and we have the greatest rectangular stadium in Australia, Combank Stadium, that we play out of. We have a centre of excellence coming along, and which will be open very soon, I'm led to believe. We are financially backed pretty well. So, look, that's why we should be a powerhouse in the NRL, but we simply aren't. I have mentioned previously on the Talking Parra podcast that there has to be change when it comes to recruitment and retention. I do believe that we have not signed a massive name in rugby league. I cannot remember the last one that signed with Parramatta. People will say Mitchell Moses. At the time, he wasn't a big name signing. People will say Zach Lomax. Yes, look, he is a great signing for the club. Made his State of Origin debut this year. At the time, he had never played State of Origin. A good signing, but I'm talking about your massive signings. I'm talking about when, look, whether we were in the ballpark or not, signings, like when Cooper Cronk came back to Sydney, or came to Sydney from Melbourne, and he signed with the Roosters. Were we ever in the ballpark? Look, that may have been before the current recruitment and retention teams, before they arrived at the club. But it just seemed, as I said, I cannot remember the last big major signing. We had Anthony Watmo a long time ago. That didn't end up too well. We had Kieran Foran as well. That didn't end up too well. But I just cannot remember the last big major signing that Parramatta has had. Look, over the last couple of years, obviously we saw after the 22 grand final, we saw 5 or so plus players leave. Players such as Reid Marnie, obviously going to the Bulldogs. Now, I do not know the ins and outs of his contracts, whether Parramatta paid or offered enough to pay him to stay at the Bulldogs. I don't know about Isaiah Papali'i. My thoughts about that leaving the club was for a money reason, and if I read the media right, he signed for the Tigers for about $700,000 to $750,000. Now, my opinion about that was the fact that he went to the Tigers for money because, in my opinion, I didn't think he was worth that money. He played great football at Parramatta. Parramatta developed him and made him under Brad Arthur, and made him from the Warriors, from a regular first grader into a back rower in demand. Now, that 22 season, he won the Dally M second rower of the year, I do believe, and it showed in his football why he won that award. And look, the Tigers, and they still probably are desperate for players to rebuild their club. Murata Niokore, I believe he went back to New Zealand for personal and family reasons. That's fair enough. I don't begrudge him for doing that. Ray Stone, he went to the Dolphins. I believe that was for him to play regular first grade. Look, I don't know whether these players were getting the right treatment at Parramatta. Perhaps they were, perhaps they weren't. I don't know. I wasn't in and around the inner sanctum at the time, but these are just my opinions. I think he probably went to the Dolphins to play regular first grade, the same for Oregon Kaufusi as well. So they were just some from 2022. Sure, I've been disappointed with a lot of players that have left the club over the years. One that sticks out for me is Manu Ma'u. When he left the club, I was disappointed when he left, because I really liked the way that he played the game, nice and tough and rugged. So I was disappointed with him. So I just think that the recruitment and retention needs to be better at the club. Now, obviously, it's been in the news that there is a recruitment and retention committee, and I guess they probably, I'm sure maybe they would agree that it isn't working. I don't know. But we've seen this week only as well, Blaze Talangi leaving the club. He's going potentially to the Panthers. It hasn't been announced yet. So we've lost a local junior there. Ethan Sanders is going to Canberra. That's another local junior. Matt Arthur. Now, the Matt Arthur one is a little bit understandable, I guess you could say, because of the situation with his father, Brad, being sacked by the club. He probably needs to move away from the club as as well because of that. It must be tough for him to be there, but still disappointing for him to leave the club. State of Origin under-19s captain, a future first grader. Look, he debuted in first grade for Parramatta this season. I guess, look, when we're talking about debutants and this season, that has been one of the shining lights, I think, in this season. That the fact that we've had 7 or so debutants in first grade, which we haven't seen the likes of in one season for a long, long time. And it was good to see these junior players get a debut in first grade at the time. I mean, we have had injuries over the season, so players have been needed to be called up. That could be one of the reasons. So it was good to see that happen and those players get their debut. One other situation that I have spoken out about on the Talking Parra podcast is also the Brad Arthur sacking and the handling from the board, I guess you could say, the football board of that sacking. I wasn't potentially too happy about that sacking. My thoughts at the start of the season was that Brad would have to make the finals, or Parramatta would have to make the finals, or Brad would have to coach the Eels to the finals in 2024 to keep his job. Otherwise, yes, he may be in a little bit of trouble. I didn't see the sacking happening during the season like it did after Magic Round there. And look, I don't believe that the coaching situation was handled the best. I don't think there is a right way or a wrong way to do that. I think this was probably the wrong way, but hey, I'm just a fan. I'm not an expert, right? So, without having a replacement in mind for a coach, if you're going to sack a coach, I don't think that sits pretty well. I think the coaching dramas that we had after that as to who was going to be coach, with a number of applicants being raised in the media in terms of wanting to get the job at Parramatta. The fact that it took, I think, off memory, 7 or 8 weeks to get that. And I understand that the club needed to make the right decision in terms of picking a coach from the applicants. They just didn't need to rush into it. They needed to make the right decision, as this was a big decision for the club to get right for the future. And look, now that they have, obviously it's a few weeks old now that they have picked Jason Riles and signed him as a coach for the Eels in 2025, all we can do as fans, and myself included, is support Jason in his decisions moving forward, and support him, especially in his first season. Now, look, I guess this is probably a little bit. I guess it's disappointing that fans and people at the club, and if they are listening to this podcast, it is a little bit disappointing that I am tied up in this. Now, I can understand why they are thinking that, and that is because I am a part of that podcast. Now, as I said before, I am only the audio producer on the podcast. I bring out the podcasts on Apple and Spotify each and every week. I record the audio from the podcast that goes. We do our Facebook Lives every week, and I have my own opinion on each and every week's games and Parramatta news on that podcast, and they are my personal opinions. I don't necessarily agree all the time with the Talking Parra podcast's decisions. Now, that is not to have a go at the guys on the Talking Parra podcast, because, as I said before, they have their thoughts and opinions as well, because they are fans of the Parramatta Eels and they want to see the same thing as me. They want to see success. They want to see premierships from this Parramatta Eels team. They want the best for the fans as well of this club, because this club probably hasn't been the best with the fans, and look, I'm sure they will agree with that. And when I say they haven't been the best with the fans, I guess in the way of especially player interaction after games. Now, look, this is always a hard topic to talk about, because again, you don't know the inner sanctum, you don't know what goes on, you don't know what the coach wants or doesn't want, but it is something that I have seen over the last few years, I guess you could say, that it has probably been lacking. Look, there has been parts where it has been good, there has been parts where it hasn't been good, mostly hasn't been good, and that is one thing that I will say that I am disappointed about with the club, and that is the fan interaction. Now, I guess when I talk about that, I guess I see other clubs and other players from other teams engaging with their fans, signing autographs, taking selfies, even the fan days that they have as well, member days, fans and members days that they have when they're interstate or away. Just that interaction is lacking, I think, from the club. Now, sometimes it is hard to do that, but look, at the end of the day, without your fans, you're not going to have a club. You're not going to have a game, because the game is for the fans. So, look, it can be controversial at times on the Talking Parra podcast, but look, as I said, that is what it is all about. That is fans having an opinion about the club. Now, for the suggestion that my name and my face, or my name is on every single post that is brought out by them, that is not true. Just because I am probably I guess you could say, the most well-known member as a Parramatta fan on there, that and being associated through that, and everything that they do is probably disappointing. So, look, I just wanted to come on this podcast. I wanted to come on my podcast, the Parra Cave podcast, because you'll also hear my opinions on here as well from time to time. Look, I've done Troy's take on coaching appointment of Jason Riles, the sacking of Brad Arthur, player signings and retentions, I guess you could say. And look, I give game reviews as well, so I give my opinions on here, the Parra Cave podcast. So if ever in doubt, you can always have a listen to this one about what I'm talking about when it comes to this club. But for the suggestion that the club is filthy at myself and fans as well, I just look, I'm really disappointed about that, because as everybody knows, I love this club. It is a very difficult part at the moment, supporting this club with everything that is going on. I have gone on record as saying that this is the worst ever season I have encountered supporting the Parramatta Eels. And look, when it comes to that, I don't know why. I guess it's maybe because I'm getting older, and I guess that's because the premierships are getting, the premiership drought is getting longer. I guess I see support from other teams winning premierships. And look, it is also well known as well that I am a Parramatta fan that lives in Penrith, and I can tell you now, living being a Parramatta fan and living in Penrith is very, very difficult, especially after the last 3 years, especially in 2022 as well after that grand final. But I just want the success that they're having at our club, at my club, the Parramatta Eels. And look, there's always, I guess, at the end of the day, I guess if the club was winning premierships, then I guess a lot of this talk would not be negative. And it's probably right, because it has been 38 years since a premiership now, in 1986, when I first started supporting the Parramatta Eels. And look, it is very disappointing. So that's all I want. I just want that on-field success for the Eels. I want to celebrate a premiership. No doubt, like a lot of people at the club are wanting as well. But I do believe that there needs to be a few changes at the club. What exactly those changes need to be, I don't know. As I mentioned before, I do believe potentially in the recruitment and retention team there needs to be changes, because I don't think that it is working at the moment. So the way that they do that needs to be changed. So we can attract players to the Parramatta Eels. We want players who want to play for the club, who want to be at the club as well. So, look, Nathan Highmarsh tonight on the Matty Johns show made a very interesting point that himself, Birdie, Kalis, Michael Vella, they all took unders to stay at the club because they wanted to all stay together to have the chance to break that premiership drought and win a competition at Parramatta and be known as a Parramatta premiership winning team. And the fact that they could have earned more money at other clubs. But look, that wasn't to be. So that's what Parramatta needs and want, or that's what I would like to see, is players who want to stay at the club, be at the club, do everything they can to win a premiership. So look, that is my opinions about what is happening. And look, anyone and everyone, feel free to message me and ask me the questions about certain things. As I said before, it's pretty disappointing being tarred with the same brush as the Talking Parra podcast. And yes, look, I am a member of that podcast, but I do have my own opinions on that podcast about the certain things that come up that the Talking Parra podcast posts. So, yes, I am a well-known member of that podcast, and people say it might as well have my signature on the bottom of posts and the what, but that is not the case. All I am is the audio producer, and yes, I am a part of that podcast. And I guess it probably does look a bit bad being on that podcast, being such a well-known Parramatta Eels fan. But look, at the end of the day, I'm a fan. I was asked to be on that podcast. I enjoyed doing that podcast each and every week, and I have no dramas with what they say on that podcast. As I said, I've got different opinions sometimes to the other fans, and that's what they are, fans. They want to see the same as me and many other Parramatta, and each and every one of Parramatta Eels fans. They want to see a premiership. So, look, everyone is entitled to their opinion, whether I agree with them or not. That is the question, but I don't necessarily have the same opinion about everything that they do. So I just wanted to clarify that I am just a member of that podcast. I don't have any control. I don't do any posting for that podcast. I've got my own podcast, the Parramatta podcast, to do the posting from. That is what you will see me doing posts from. the Parra Cave podcast. I don't do anything for the Talking Parra podcast, and I am just the audio producer on that. And look, as I said before, if anybody would like to reach out and ask me a question about what I do on that podcast, please feel free. Or if you'd simply like my position on things that are happening at the club, please do. Please reach out. Look, I'd love to chat to you, and we can set the record straight. So I just thought I'd come on and talk about that issue. Look, I'm sorry that I've blubbered on, I guess, for nearly half an hour now. I hope I haven't put you to sleep, but that is just my opinions, and that was the reasoning was that is why I want to put this podcast out. So once again, please reach out if you have any questions or queries about my role on that podcast, or the Parramatta Eels, indeed, what's happening there. I am happy to answer them honestly, and look, my integrity, I guess, should never be questioned about me supporting this club, because it is there 100%, and I just want the same as everybody else, a premiership, maybe 2, maybe 3, maybe 4, but definitely 1. So thank you very much for listening. I really appreciate it. And thank you for all your support on the Parra Cave podcast. Thank you very much, and I'll catch you during the week. And with the tipping podcast that will come out, the Q&A podcast that will come out. Not 100% sure if a interview-based podcast will come out this week at the moment, but they could be, and hopefully catching up with a former NRLW player about giving a review about the NRLW round number 2, which unfortunately saw the Parramatta Eels go down closely to the Cronulla Sharks, 18 points to 16, but a very good effort indeed, considering last time they played, they got beaten by 50 points. So, look, we'll have a review about the NRLW round, which I know is something that you guys would be interested in, and it is important to cover that as well as being Women in League round as well. So, look, I hope you enjoyed your weekend of rugby league, and thank you very much to all the women involved in rugby league at every club, every level, in every way. I really appreciate what you do for the game of rugby league. Thank you very much for listening. Enjoy the week. I'll see you next time, and go Parra!
Hello, Parra Cave podcast listeners. My name is Shannon Cooney from Glenmore Park Realty and long-term sponsor of the Parra Cave podcast. If you're looking to sell your property or buy, or just curious to know what your property is worth in today's market, give me a call today on 0421 588 445.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the Parra Cave podcast. See you next time.